The more a scroll written in scriptio continua had to be read top to bottom if anything was to be taken from it. A scroll has just a single point of entry, a first word, because it has to be unwound to read, and because there are no punctuation marks or paragraph to break up the text. To say nothing of page numbers, a table, contents, chapter, division, and an index. It is impossible to find a specific piece of information without scanning the whole thing, head to toe. It is not a text that can be easily consulted until it is memorized. This is a key point. Ancient texts couldn't be readily scanned. You couldn't pull a scroll off the shelf and quickly find a specific expert unless you had some baseline familiarity with the entire text. The scroll existed not to hold its contents externally, but rather to help its reader navigate its contents internally. One of the last places where this tradition was written will still survive is in the reading of the Torah, an ancient handwriting scroll that can take upward of a year to inscribe. The Torah is written without vowels or punctuation, so it does have spaces and innovation that came to Hebrew before Greek, which means it's extremely difficult to sight read. So Jews are specifically commanded not to recite the Torah from memory. There is no way to read a section of the Torah without having invested a lot of time familiarizing with it, as an on-Sebar Mitzahad boy can tell you. I can personally vouch for this. On the day I became a man, I was really just a parrot in a yarmulke, though years of language use condition us to notice. Scriptio continua has more in common with the way we actually speak than artificial word division on this page. Spoken sentence flows together seamlessly as one long, blurry, drawn-out sound. We don't speak with spaces. Where one word ends and another begins is relatively arbitrary linguistic convention. If you look at on a graphic chart visualizing the sound waves of someone speaking English, it's practically impossible to tell where the spaces are, which is one of the reasons why it's proven so difficult to train computers to recognize speech without sophisticated artificial intelligence capable of figuring out context. A computer has no way of telling the difference between the stuffy noise made him liquor and the stuff he knows made him liquor. For a period, Latin scribes actually did try separating words with dots, but in the 2nd century AD, there was a revision, a giant and very curious step back, it would seem. The old continuous scripts used by the Greeks spaces weren't seen again in Western writing for another 900 years. From our vantage point today, separating words seems like a no-brainer, but the fact that it was tried and rejected says a lot about how people used to read. So too does the fact that the ancient Greek would most commonly use to signify to read was anagignosko, Greek word most commonly used to signify Greek, which means to know again, or to recollect. Reading as an act of remembering from our modern vantage point. Could there be a more unfamiliar relationship between reader and text? Today we live amid a deluge of printed words. Would you believe that 10 billion volumes were printed years later? It's hard to imagine what it must have been like to read in the age before Gutenberg, when a book was a rare and costly handwriting object that could take a scribe months of labor to produce. Even as late as the 15th century, there might be just several dozen copies of any giant text in existence, and those copies were quite probably chained to a desk lectern in some university library, which, if it contained 100 other books, would have been considered particularly well stacked. If you were a medieval scholar reading a book, you knew that there was a reasonable likelihood you'd never see that particular text again, and so a high premium was placed on remembering what you read. You couldn't just pull a book off the shelf to consult it for a quote or idea. For one thing, modern bookshelves with the rows of outward-facing spines hadn't even been invented yet. That didn't happen until sometime around the 16th century. For another thing, books still tended to be heavy, hardly portable objects. It was only in the 13th century that bookmaking technology advanced to the point that the Bible could be compiled in a single volume rather than a collection of independent books. And yet, it weighed more than 10 pounds, and even if you did happen to have a text have a text you needed close at hand. The chance of finding what you were looking for without reading the whole thing, start to finish, which the indexes were not yet common. Nor were page numbers or tables of contents. But these gaps were gradually filled, and as the book itself changed, so too did the crucial role of memory and reading. By about the year 400, the parchment codex, with its leaves of pages bound at the spine, like a modern hardcover, had all but completely replaced scrolls as the preferred way to read. No longer did a reader have to unfold a long document to read a passage. A reader could just turn to the point appropriate page. The first considerance of the Bible, a grand index that consumed the labors of 500 Persian monks. 500 Parisian monks. After compiled in the 15th century, around the same time that chapter divisions were introduced for the first time, a reader could refer to the Bible without having previously memorized it. One could find a passage without knowing it by heart, or read the text all the way through. Soon after the concordance, other books with alphabetical indexes, page numbers, and tables of contents began to appear, and as they did, they again helped change the essence of what a book was. The problem of the book before the index table of contents is that for all the material contained in a scroll or between the covers of a book, it was impossible to navigate. What makes the brain such an incredible tool is not just the sheer volume of information it contains, but the ease and efficiency with which it can find that information. It uses the greatest random access index system ever invented, one that computer scientists haven't even close to replicating, whereas an index in the back of the book provides a single address, a page number, for each important subject. Each subject in the brain has hundreds, if not thousands, of addresses. Our internal memories are associational, nonlinear. You don't need to know where a particular memory is stored in order to find it. It simply turns up or doesn't. When you need it, because of the dense network that interconnects our memories, we can skip around from memory to memory and idea to idea very rapidly, from very white to the color white to milk to Milky Way, and that is a long voyage conceptually, but short jaunts neurologically indexes were major advances because they allow books to be accessed in the nonlinear way we access our internal memories. They help turn the book into something of like a modern CD, where you can skip directly to the track you want, as compared to unindexed books, which like cassette tapes force you to troll laboriously through the large swath of materials in order to find the bit you're looking for, along with page numbers and table of contents. The index changed what a book was and what it could do for scholars. The historian Ivan Lich was argued that this represented an innovation of such magnitude that it seemed reasonable to speak of pre- and post-Middle Ages. As books became easier and easier to consume, the imperative to hold their contents in memory became less and less relevant, and the very notion of what it meant to be erudite began to evolve, from possessing information internally to knowing where to find information in the labyrinth word of external memory.